All right, let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining the Innovation Cafe today. Real quickly before we get started, we had over 1,000 people registered for this webinar, which we're very excited about. But because of that, I'd like to see who is able to see full screen right now. Please raise your hand if you're able to see full screen of the slides, and I will take note. Perfect. Excellent. Thank you. All righty. And let me know, and you can always put in the chat or question function if you are not able to see the slides at any point. With that, I'd like to thank you again for joining us in Building the Business Case for Innovation, a presentation and Q&A held by Peter Burris, Vice President and Research Director at Forrester Research, and Amy Millard, Chief Marketing Officer at MindJet. I'll be turning it over to Peter soon, but first want to give the audience some tips for interacting with our speakers. I'm Allie Klein, our moderator for today's webinar. If at any time you have a question, please ask it using the chat or question function within GoToWebinar. You can also interact with our team via social media by tweeting at MindJet and using the hashtag InnovationCafe. Following the presentation, we'll have a 15-minute Q&A period, and we'll be able to answer your questions at that time. We will also be recording this webinar, which will be available to view on our website. With that, I'd like to introduce you to our speakers today. Our first speaker is Peter Burris. He's our guest speaker. He's the Research Director at Forrester Research, where he has been since 2008. In his role, Peter helps to set the overall CIO role research agenda at Forrester, as well as craft effective CIO research with senior analysts and ensure overall CIO research quality. His research team focuses on the evolving relationship between CIOs and CMOs, best practices in building and instituting IT and BT strategy, as well as BT innovation approaches to accelerate business outcomes and social business and collaboration strategies. Joining Peter today is Amy Millard, Chief Marketing Officer at MindJet. Amy leads all strategic and operational aspects of marketing for MindJet's diverse global market. Through her role as CMO, Amy builds on her 20 years of experience in software marketing and her commitment to the potential of continuous innovation. Prior to joining MindJet, Amy was the VP of Marketing at Support.com, where she led global marketing efforts. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Peter to get started.
Thanks very much, Allie. Could you transfer? There we go. Excellent. Okay. So first off, it is an honor to be here. Forrester has always been at the vanguard of the role between innovation and business. In fact, our tagline is a great way to start. With the idea of increasingly as a consequence of the changes that we face both in government and commercial settings, that we have to do more of the challenging thinking that is so crucial to making change happen and then leading that change. And in many respects, that's at the core of what we mean by innovation. So what I'm going to do over the course of the next 20, 25 minutes or so is kick off this notion of building the business case for innovation. And I'm going to lean very heavily on Amy to help out towards the end of this. But for the first part of my presentation, what I want to do is I want to basically tell hopefully a relatively simple story. And it starts with this notion of increasingly, if we're going to be successful, we have to work with business and technology to develop the customer-obsessed strategies that drive growth. That's what Forrester has historically been focused on. That's what we think everybody on the call needs to start worrying about. So how are we going to have that conversation? Well, we're going to basically go through 3 points. The first point will be that we're going to talk about something that Forrester calls the age of the customer. And the fundamental of the age of the customer is that increasingly customers are gaining market power, and as a consequence of their ascension within markets, businesses have to respond and do things differently. Specifically, we're talking increasingly about the role of digital business and how digital business is going to do a better job of creating new and improved customer experiences, simplified and more straightforward engagement, and in a way that ultimately allows the customer to succeed wherever they are in the life cycle. Forrester believes that the necessary technology response will be something that we call business technology, which effectively means that we end up with a new mode of thinking about the role of technology within business, a new agenda, as we like to say. And then finally, that new agenda, what we call the BT agenda, is absolutely dependent upon innovation and the role that innovation is going to play in identifying and driving those new levels of customer value. And that the most important point of that notion of the role of innovation will be that innovation is something that can be practiced. And to do that is going to require important changes in organization and important changes in the tooling associated with innovation. So let's jump right into it and start off with what we mean by the age of the customer. There's a huge transformation underway. And to summarize the characteristics of that transformation, imagine very quickly that historically we've seen a kind of a teeter-totter here, where if you think about the power that existed within markets, most of the power, most of the advantage was over on the institutional side. That businesses were able to set price, they were the main sources of information about markets and about products and services, and they ultimately determined the characteristics of many of the market-making mechanisms, including location. Customers were largely passive in this conversation. However, what we've seen occur in the past few years, partly in response to this enormous rise of social technologies, that the teeter-totter has changed. Increasingly, customers are creating new sources of market power. Why? Because the information flows crucial to making markets have started to be centered on customers. Customers talking to customers. Customers working with their peers, identifying different information about what products do, what services do, locations becoming more digital and online, and increasingly price being something that's open and discussed so shopping becomes more effective. Now, to summarize this transition, we can look at a few key points. The first one to note is that information asymmetries are eroding. Now, information asymmetry is kind of a technical term, but the basic notion is an asymmetry exists, an information asymmetry exists when one or another party has a significant information advantage. Those information advantages used to be in the hands of sellers, now they're moving to customers. Secondly, asset specificities are disappearing. The asset specificity is another technical term that basically says to what degree is an asset only appropriable to a specific commercial use. And as a consequence of this, of the enormous power of digital technologies and things like the Internet of Things and advanced methods for creating very rich software, that we are introducing more programmability into the assets of business and the assets of how consumers do things. So as a consequence, they can be reconfigured and applied more rapidly to new purposes, often that are co-created by multiple parties. The third point is that there's no doubt that one of the most important assets anywhere, certainly for consumers, but increasingly for business, is mobile. And the fact that we are no longer tied to location the way we once were, both as consumers, but also very importantly as businesses. We can present our business in new and novel and highly mobile ways. You take these three things together, information asymmetries eroding, asset specificities become a programmability disappearing, and the fact that location is starting to evolve in its importance ultimately means that we are on the threshold of an enormous era of digital disruption. Digital disruption that's going to be capable of redefining entire industries without an enormous amount of forewarning. And to summarize all of that, Forrester's defined what we call the age of the customer, which is a 20-year business cycle in which the most successful enterprises will have to reinvent themselves to systematically understand and serve increasingly powerful customers. Now that sounds like a nice bit of a marketing bromide, but if we parse this statement out, we actually end up with some really crucial insights. So let's do that. First off, the notion of a 20-year business cycle simply states that this is permanent, this is ongoing, and it's going to be long-lasting. This is not something that's going to end tomorrow. It's going to be the next era of how business is conducted. But there's 4 crucial words in this definition. The first one is reinvent. The second one is systematically. The third is understand. And the fourth is serve. So let's take a look at how these 4 words translate into the types of capabilities that businesses will have to build to succeed in the age of the customer. To do that, let's start with this notion of the customer at the center of all of these changes. Clearly, that's what's driving a lot of what's happening. But the first word, reinvent. What is going to be reinvented? Well, effectively, it's the digital technology foundation. It's the digital technology change that's going to be the basis for the reinvention. We're going to reinvent by introducing increasingly digital mechanisms, toolings, methods, and services into all aspects of our business as it pertains to the customer and as it pertains to the operations. So the first word that's crucial is this notion of digital business and how it is going to lead to reinvention. But to do that, we have to, there's a lot of different directions we could take with this introduction to more digital technologies, but we have to do so in a systematic way. And the systematic factor is we're going to do so in the context of customer experience. We're going to reinvent in ways that drive improved customer experience. Now, to gain insight into what kinds of customer experiences will be advantageous, we need to understand our customers by utilizing data and driving it deep into our organization so that the voice of the customer is a feature of virtually every decision we make and every action we take. It's not enough, of course, to be able to do all this reinvention against some common set of constraints with an understanding of how those constraints affect the business. We have to then serve. And the notion of serve is going back to that notion of mobile, where a customer is, when a customer wants to be served, and in the context that the customer requires. So these 4 capabilities naturally pop out of this notion of the age of the customer. Now, what I want to do is I want to give you a couple of proof points about this. The first thing that I want to do is I want to point out that this notion of digital technologies and how it is affecting customer engagement is not something that we're just making up. Now, note, this is data from a couple of years ago, and it comes out of Forrester's utterly unique technographic survey, which is one of the largest surveys in the world pertaining to customer intentions, customer behaviors, and customer expectations regarding technology and other approaches that they make to living better lives. So what this chart shows is that it shows the degree to which consumers in the U.S. indicate that they would be more likely to shop or interact with a sales associate who's equipped with a mobile device. So this is going into a retail store, and whether or not a customer would bias their choice of what retail brands to enter into, what locations to enter into, based on whether or not those sales associates are equipped with a digital mechanism that connects them back to the business. And as you can see, there is increasingly a broad orientation to wanting to see digital be featured even in a retail setting. So this is something that is becoming preferred by customers. Customers are beginning to bias their choices of who they do business with, certainly in retail, more broadly in B2C, but even in the B2B universe. This is one of the most important changes within B2B overall, that the role that customers perceive greater value when they can engage digitally. Now, this is obviously having an effect back on executive decision makers. So this next little bit of data that I want to show you is the degree to which executives in our customer base are starting to evolve their thinking regarding the role of different business objectives and how they're driving transformation. So here's a list of different objectives on the y-axis, and you'll note the two colors. One is going to be light blue for the IT professionals, and one is going to be dark blue for the business professionals. And, you know, IT professionals kind of responded in a way that most people typically think that they might respond. They've been so beaten about the head regarding costs and reducing costs that it pops out to the top of the list. And historically, that's what we've seen be the most important things within the universe of business decision makers. But interesting things been happening in the last couple of years. Reducing costs has been dropping as the business driver, and revenue growth and improving customer experience have been increasing as business drivers. So when we start to combine all of this notion of digital business driving better customer engagement to succeed in the age of the customer, it's starting to find its way into the boardrooms and corner offices of businesses on a global basis, because it's clear that it's not business as usual anymore. Executives recognize that a change is underfoot, even if they don't fully understand it. And very importantly, look at the gap between technology and application rationalization. It is a much bigger deal for the IT decision maker today than it is for the business decision maker. Clearly, what we need to do as technology professionals, for those of you who are technology professionals, is we have to do a better job of engaging the business with whatever set of technologies are in place, even as we evolve that technology base. And that's going to be a crucial element overall of how we think about innovation within the business. That leads to the second point. So this is what's going on with customers overall. How is that being translated into business decisions? Well, the first thing to think about is that we have to be a little bit prescriptive about what is digital business, because it means so much to so many different things to so many different people. I want to try to make it, for our purposes today, as simple as I can. Number one, it ain't digital if it ain't data. That perhaps sounds so too simple to even be worth talking about, but it has a very, very important analog, to use a pun. And that is that the challenge here is to transform more of the business into data. That's really what we're trying to do with digital business. Now, we don't want to do that willy-nilly. We want to do it, again, against the constraints that I talked about earlier before, doing a better job of serving customers. But in any way you look about it, there's going to be three broad classes of effort necessary to translate business into data. First, we're going to add data for analytics, simulation, and service. Clearly, knowing and predicting what people want and how to provide them to them is a crucial element of digital business. Secondly, we're going to increase the use of instrumentation for control, for communication, and for service. And then very importantly, we're going to add software for anything. And this might be the centerpiece of the digital business transformation. Remember, software is data. That what we're really looking to do within business over the next few years is more rapidly introduce high-quality software that drives new levels of business value based on customer needs and measurable customer experience. Now, sounds new, but the reality is we've been doing this in the technology universe in certain ways for a long time. For the last 50 years, we've digitized supply chain, manufacturing, finance, HR, administrative, legal. We've, however, done this largely for employees based on known processes, even mandated processes, like the SEC will not let you report your results unless you follow certain processes for generating revenue. What we're talking about now is a new era in which we're going to start bringing the process of digitizing business to increasingly complex business activities. Activities that are defined differently from what we used to call the IT agenda to what we call the business technology agenda. And those activities share a number of features. First off, they're people intensive. So we're trying to do a better job of serving human beings. They are defined by external schedules, not internal project schedules, but by market contingencies and customer needs. They are not based on known processes, they're based on the discovery of customer journeys. We're not talking about serving millions of employees, we're talking about serving billions of customers. And very importantly, we're not talking about a relatively closed and cloistered group of developers building out that IT agenda stuff. We're talking about millions of authors in multiple domains, inside and external to the company, in partnerships, and in industries that we have never even conceived of as having a relationship with us. That's the basis for what we mean by the BT agenda. The BT agenda is about winning, serving, and retaining customers with technology. And it's the most important thing in technology today, and is the basis for so much of the change in the tech industry and the vehicle by which we're going to build these digital capabilities necessary to drive new classes of engagement. Now, the BT agenda is different in many ways, but the centerpiece of it, it requires speed. It requires continuous, ongoing, fast cycle governance to focus and fund iterative investments. Absolutely essential. We have to be agile and options-based to ensure that we're discovering what the customer wants and whether or not we're providing value. We can only do that if we're doing ongoing analytics so that we know what works and what's failing and dealing with it in a way that's not too invasive to decision making. We need flexible sourcing. Very importantly, we need what I call plastic enterprise API platforms, the mechanisms that allow us to connect through digital services to customers and partners. Now, I use the word plastic very importantly. Most folks use the word elastic, which means that you can scale up and down. But plastic is not elastic. Elastic kind of like you can scale up and it snaps back to its previous form. Plastic presumes that you can scale up and down and perturb the system in important ways so that it can reconfigure itself. Now, all this requires a lot of change. It means ultimately that there's going to be a lot of creativity going on. And this is perhaps the most important thing. In the age of the customer, driven by or made possible by the BT agenda, everybody's going to create to provide differential customer value during all interactions. This is why innovation becomes so important. It's because innovation perhaps never was in the high tower of overall of a few engineers. But in the age of the customer and this notion of BT, innovation is everybody's business. And that's what makes the role of innovation so crucial. So let's think about this. Historically, we've associated innovation with a limited number of decision makers and a limited number of geniuses. Well, one of the smartest people I know is a fellow by the name of Peter J. Denning, and those of you who have ever taken a computer science course might have heard of him. He's one of the fathers of modern operating system technology. A number of years ago, he took the job as the director of the Browski Institute for Innovation down at the Naval Postgraduate for a couple of years, made a couple of very important observations. First off, Peter said, innovation is not invention. It's not the creating the new thing. It's the art of getting people to adopt the change. That's what's important. And that art is a personal skill that can be developed through practice and extended into organizations. And Peter's research has shown that all successful innovations require that skill. That leads me to conclude, ultimately, that the prime innovation is to adopt the skill through practice to innovate. That's the basis of a lot of Forrester's research today. Now, to do that, we think that we need to think about innovation differently. First off, across all of the different horizontal attributes of a business, everybody's going to be participating in the innovation process. Some of those innovations will be big, some of them will be small. Some of them will be numerous and have limited but important impact, and others will be, there will be a few that have radical change. And so this graphic basically depicts a large number of incremental change and a small number of radical change, and where radical change is defined in terms of the divergence from current practice. And if we look at it, certainly we want to be able to do these large numbers of incremental changes where we are based on a standardized approach to doing things with low risk and incremental improvements, largely to operations. There will be those circumstances in which we want to do game-changing work, radical, non-standard, high-risk types of stuff. But the real sweet spot is going to be that sustained innovation, where it's supported by management, it's ongoing, it's not episodic, it's distinct governance and funding, and it has distinct success and failure measures. Now, the key word here is that it can be practiced. To say that it has distinct governance is to say that it can be practiced and supported and done right. And the types of skills that we're going to need to put in place to practice innovation successfully are listed out in this slide. We're going to have to be able to gather ideas from multiple places and make it possible to appropriately incubate them and then decide if they are in fact going to be part of a broader portfolio. Very importantly, because the real challenge is not just to gather, or is not only to gather the ideas, but it's to initiate the process of getting a community to start to evolve how it changes. We need these crucial implementation structures. And it has to be done in a way that provides management visibility into what is the change and what impacts will it have. So let me summarize my part of the presentation on these slides. First off, digital is not a radical, is a radical evolution. It's not a revolution for tech management. We've been doing many of these things for years. We have to increase the speed and adopt the new practices, innovate, if you will, around what we call the BT agenda, which increasingly is driven by customers at the center and the focal point. Winners in this age of the customer will be those that build and deploy excellent software faster than competitors. But that the only way to do that is to not just focus on the processes of building the software, but to especially focus on the innovation skills that lead to the adoption of that new software within businesses, but crucially important, within customer bases. And so with that, let me turn it back over to Amy. And Amy, there you go.
Thank you, Peter. I think as we saw that there are many ongoing trends around businesses today and business transformation that the innovation leader needs to think about as they're taking it forward. As we think about building the use case for innovation, Peter's made it clear the value of innovation. What we thought we'd do is show you some specific use cases of innovation using specific companies as examples. So at MindJet, we are the proud developers of Spigot Software, which is crowdsourcing software for innovation. What I'm going to be talking about today is what we've seen from powering over 300 innovation programs. At a high level, we work with the Fortune 500 typically to unleash the power of their employees, partners, and customers customers for innovation to do consumer products, and just as importantly, we're quite proud to power the innovation practices of the top system integrators across the globe. What I wanted to talk about a little bit next is Peter's concept of asset specificity. What he was talking about was applying assets to needs. That term has also been used, as we hear colloquially, about crowdsourcing. And I'm going to get a little bit into crowdsourcing because we're going to use it for innovation in our examples. So crowdsourcing is really about finding these assets that are underutilized and applying them to new purposes to the people who have the needs. And I'm going to use a couple examples we're all familiar with just to solidify the example. Airbnb is about enabling people who need space at that moment to find a room with people who have excess space. It's a fundamental concept. That is all they're doing. They're doing matching. They're worth billions of dollars because they're able to match the resources to the need. Another example we're familiar with is Uber. Somebody needs a ride. They're matching it to somebody at that moment who has excess capacity. This is important to think about because these are consumer examples, but what about businesses? How can businesses disrupt their own way of practice and take advantage of crowdsourcing? Well, our proposal is to begin to think about the enterprise crowd and to think about people who can contribute to innovation within your organization who are not the typical ivory-towered, siloed innovation group, but in fact are all the employees, all of your partners, and all of your customers. Because what you have there are experts at your business, at your values, at your culture, and your markets. So crowdsourcing doesn't just apply to asking complete strangers questions about their segments and what you can learn from them, but crowdsourcing can apply to large businesses. And in fact, we're going to talk about specifically what large businesses are doing with crowdsourcing. So just as Uber has matched excess resources of cars and drivers to people who need rides, the Innovation Office can match business owners with specific processes, issues, marketers who want to improve their marketing programs and find new markets, product management who wants to innovate on features, finance, call center systems, the various lines of business. Innovation is everybody's business, and the innovation lead can play that matching role to employees, partners, and customers. So the takeaways across the programs that we've seen, the first one is that successful innovation takes many forms. Many of the innovation programs we see often start with a premise, which is, I want to improve processes, or the CEO has asked me for that $1 billion idea. What we see is that these programs evolve over time, and in fact, they have multifaceted innovation outcomes that they're seeking over time. And no one program is focused exclusively on one kind of innovation, but they have a tendency to highlight specific types of innovation over time. So you can begin at market disruption and bring in process improvement. You can focus in on cost efficiencies and then continue on later to focus in on market disruption. So this is a key concept, that innovation takes many forms. The next takeaway we've seen is that innovation is not a one-time event. Often, when you start with that idea that I want the billion-dollar idea, I want to change the world, all of that, that's great. But to Peter's earlier point, sustained innovation is the sweet spot. So I'm going to give you a specific example of AT&T. AT&T has a program called the Innovation Pipeline. You can Google it. They've got wonderful videos. It's a 24/7 innovation hub that is constantly on. And AT&T has created dozens of new products out of this innovation hub. I want to describe a specific one because it really highlights the value of reaching into the employee crowd. So this is a picture of a frontline customer service representative in the Detroit AT&T call center. Her name is Siobhan. And several years ago, before some of the campaigns you've seen now, the issue of texting and driving was a new issue. And Siobhan had recently lost a friend to texting and driving. She went to the TIP program and suggested an idea for an application that AT&T could support on mobile phones that shut the mobile phone down when the car was driving. And this was such a great idea that AT&T not only developed the application, but created a whole marketing campaign around it. Siobhan ended up on the Today program, and every single time you call AT&T today, the very last words any customer service rep will give you across the globe is, please don't text and drive. That's how fundamental this idea has become to AT&T. And this is just an example of the kinds of innovation that can come out. And Siobhan doesn't work in the product group, and neither do many of the good ideas that come from outside of the typical product group. So this is the example of innovation can come from anywhere with sustained innovation. The next takeaway that I wanted to talk about is just that, the disruptive innovation, not just process improvement, but disruptive, game-changing innovation can come from any part of the organization. So one of the typical things in business, I'm a CMO, and I think, okay, I know everything about marketing at this point, and I'm going to talk to other marketing leaders to find out new ideas. I'm going to talk to the marketing team, but I don't often walk down to HR and say, what do you guys think about which markets we should be in? It's just the way we work. So we get into this habit of thinking, well, disruptive innovation is going to come from my team. These great ideas are going to come from my team. So I want to give you a specific example of Pfizer. So Pfizer has spent tens of years improving their clinical processes. They have literally 2,000 researchers whose job it is to invent new drugs and improve the clinical outcomes of them. PhDs, this is their job. The head of innovation at Pfizer, her name is Wendy, had an idea. She said, we've tried over and over and over to improve the cost of clinical trials. It can do no harm to reach out into our broader employee base on a very specific drug and find out if there are any other ideas out there. They had zero expectations after 2,000 researchers working on this problem. But that is the advantage of going to a different population who understands your business. For just one drug, out of this pilot, they reduced the cost of clinical trial by 60%. Now that is a game-changing number for a company like Pfizer, where everything that they do is small increments, generally in research. So Pfizer's program is called the Own It program, and they use both internal innovation, that's what we mean by employees, and external innovation by reaching out into their partners, their customers, healthcare institutions, to make sure that they are always looking out for out-of-the-blue ideas. So the final thing is that breakthrough innovation can happen at any time in a program. So just because your program starts with process improvement as the idea, or you begin with employee engagement, it doesn't mean that breakthrough innovation can't happen. And also, once you get one breakthrough idea, doesn't mean that there's not another one right behind it. Once you build this muscle for innovation, you can actually build a significant pipeline of breakthrough ideas, not just process improvements. A specific company that focuses in on this is Cambia. They're a multi-billion-dollar healthcare technology company, mostly sells to other healthcare organizations. And 2011, when they began their innovation program, less than 40% of their employees agreed that Cambia encouraged innovation. And Mohan Nahir is the head of innovation there, and he is just a fantastic innovator. And over his time of running the innovation program, not only have they increased the employee engagement, which was an initial goal, to the point that 84% of Cambia employees agree that Cambia encourages innovation, they have, out of this, had some breakthrough technologies to the point that they've actually already created 4 new companies and already seen $171 million in revenue posted last year from these companies. So the final takeaway I would give you is this summary, that innovation takes no one form and can happen at any time, and to make sure that you are reaching into the broader crowd at all times to help disrupt your own technology and your own businesses. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, everyone. Thank you, Amy, and thank you, Peter. We're going to be going into Q&A now, so we'll give you 30 seconds or so to start submitting your questions in the Q&A section, and then we'll be taking questions for the next 10 minutes here. So again, we will allow everyone to start entering their questions, and then we will start answering them for you, both Peter and Amy.